She slapped a stranger thinking he was her ex, unaware he was a billionaire who'd fall for her. In a small-town cafe, one angry mistake turns an ordinary woman's world upside down. She thought she was getting revenge, but instead she struck the wrong man, a quiet stranger with scars of his own and a secret worth billions. What begins as humiliation turns into something no one saw coming: forgiveness, faith, and a second chance at love. But when her ex returns, spreading lies and stirring scandal, her heart and his reputation hang in the balance. Now the whole town is watching. Can a single act of grace heal two broken souls? Or will one mistake destroy the love that was never supposed to happen? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The sticky Georgia heat clung to Danielle Brooks like a second skin as she hurried down Main Street. Her sensible work shoes clicked against the sidewalk, each step a reminder that she was running late. Again. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, making the short walk to Mason's Cafe feel like a trek through molasses. Her mind raced faster than her feet. Mom's new prescription had cost more than expected, and Tommy's school had just announced a surprise field trip fee. The numbers danced in her head, a familiar dance of desperation she knew all too well. $50 here, $75 there. It all added up to more than her tips could cover. Lord, give me strength, she whispered, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The cafe's faded blue awning came into view, a beacon of both relief and anxiety. She was 15 minutes late, and Sarah, her manager, had already given her 2 warnings this month. The bell above the door chimed as Danielle pushed inside, the blast of air conditioning making her shiver despite the heat. The familiar sense of coffee and fresh-baked pie wrapped around her like a comfort blanket. But that comfort shattered the moment her eyes landed on the man sitting by the window. Time seemed to freeze. Her heart stopped, then started again with a vengeful thunder. There he sat, casual as could be, reading a newspaper like he hadn't destroyed her life 2 years ago. Trevor. The sunlight streaming through the window caught his profile just so, highlighting that same sharp jawline that had once made her weak in the knees. Now it just made her sick. The memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. The bounced rent checks, the borrowed money that never came back, the lies, the shame of facing her mama, having to admit she'd been fooled by a sweet-talking con man. And worst of all, that smirk he'd worn when he'd told her she was too trusting for her own good before walking out of her life. Before Danielle knew what she was doing, her feet were moving. The logical part of her brain shut down completely, replaced by 2 years of bottled-up rage and hurt. She barely registered the surprised looks from the regular customers as she stormed past their tables. Her palm connected with his cheek before she even realized she'd raised her hand. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed through the cafe like a gunshot. Several gasps rose from nearby tables, followed by that awful silence that follows a public scene. The man's head snapped to the side from the force of her slap. His newspaper crumpled to the floor, forgotten. When he turned back to face her, something wasn't right. His eyes, they weren't Trevor's cold blue, but a warm brown, filled with confusion and something else. Concern. "I think you've mistaken me, Mum," he said quietly, one hand rising to touch his reddening cheek. His voice was different too, deeper, gentler than Trevor's sharp tone had ever been. Horror washed over Danielle like ice water. She blinked, really looking at him now. Yes, there was a resemblance to Trevor. The same tall build, similar features. But this man was older, his face kinder, marked with subtle laugh lines around his eyes. His clothes were simple but well-made, nothing like Trevor's flashy suits. And there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself, even after being assaulted by a complete stranger. The giggles started then, soft at first, then growing. She could hear Mrs. Henderson's distinctive cackle from the corner booth, and someone at the counter wasn't even trying to hide their snorts of laughter. Each sound was like a needle in her heart. "Oh my God!" Danielle whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. You looked like—" The words wouldn't come. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, and her chest felt too tight to breathe. She had to get out of there. "I'm sorry!" She choked out again, then turned and fled. The bell's cheerful jingle seemed to mock her as she burst back out into the humid afternoon, leaving behind a cafe full of witnesses to her humiliation. Through the window, Elijah Morgan watched her go, absently rubbing his cheek. The sting was already fading, but the image of her face, first fierce with righteous anger, then crumpling with mortification, stayed with him. There had been such pain in her eyes, such raw hurt beneath the flash of temper. It stirred something in him, a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time. The cafe gradually returned to its normal buzz of conversation, but Elijah remained thoughtful, his newspaper forgotten on the floor. He'd come to Mason's seeking a quiet afternoon away from his thoughts, but instead found himself wondering about the woman who'd mistaken him for someone else. Someone who had clearly hurt her deeply. His cheek tingled where she'd slapped him, and despite himself, a small smile tugged at his lips. It had been a long time since anything had surprised him like this. A long time since he'd felt much of anything at all, if he was honest with himself. Sarah, the manager, hurried over to his table, her round face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Morgan, I am so sorry about that. Danielle is usually one of our best waitresses. I've never seen her act like this before. I'll make sure this never happens again." "It's fine," Elijah said softly, cutting off her stream of apologies. "No harm done." He glanced towards the door again, remembering the way the woman, Danielle, had looked just before she ran. Like a wounded animal, desperate to escape. Will she be all right? Sarah followed his gaze, her expression softening with concern. "I hope so. She's had it rough, that one. Works hard, never complains, but—" She trailed off, probably remembering she shouldn't gossip about employees to customers. Elijah nodded, understanding the unspoken words. He knew about rough times, about carrying burdens that felt too heavy to bear. He knew about pain that could make a person act in ways they never would otherwise. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the window, painting patterns on the worn linoleum floor. Life in the cafe went on. Coffee was poured, orders were taken, pie was served. But something had shifted in the air, like the first stirring of leaves before a storm. Neither Elijah nor Danielle could have known it then, but that mistaken identity slap had set something in motion, something that would change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. For now, though, Elijah simply picked up his newspaper, smoothed out the wrinkles, and tried to focus on the words in front of him. But his thoughts kept drifting to tear-filled eyes and the echo of an apology, wondering what story lay behind that impulsive slap, and why he felt so compelled to understand it. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows at Mason's cafe, but Danielle barely noticed it. Her hands moved on autopilot as she wiped down the counter for the third time, her mind stuck on yesterday's mortifying incident. The cloth traced endless circles on the already spotless surface while the morning regulars chatted over their coffee and eggs. "Earth to Danielle." Tina's voice cut through her daze. "That counter's clean enough to perform surgery on, honey." Danielle jumped, dropping the cloth. "Sorry, I was just thinking about yesterday." Tina leaned against the counter, her dark eyes soft with concern. "Listen, about that man you slapped, please don't." Danielle groaned, covering her face with her hands. "I can't even think about it without wanting to crawl under a rock." No, you need to hear this." Tina insisted, gently pulling Danielle's hands away from her face. "He came back later, after your shift would have ended." Danielle's stomach dropped. "He did? Was he angry? Did he talk to Sarah about pressing charges?" Tina's laugh rang out, drawing curious glances from nearby tables. "Girl, quite the opposite. He was nice. Really nice, actually. Quiet type, you know? Sat at the same window seat, ordered coffee, worked on some papers, even left you a note." "A note?" Danielle's voice cracked. Tina reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and precise. "No hard feelings. Mondays test all of us. EM." Danielle stared at the note, reading it 3 times before the words really sank in. Her chest felt tight with a mixture of relief and renewed shame. "He wrote this? For me?" And left a $20 tip on a $5 coffee." Tina wiggled her eyebrows. "If that's how he responds to getting slapped, I might have to try it myself." "Tina!" But Danielle couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. It faded quickly as guilt gnawed at her again. "I need to apologize properly. Did he say if he'd be back?" "Didn't have to. He's been here every afternoon this week. Same window seat, like clockwork." Tina glanced at the clock. In fact, if you want to catch him, he usually shows up around 2 o'clock. The rest of Danielle's shift crawled by. She dropped a plate of eggs, thankfully empty, mixed up 3 orders, and nearly poured coffee into a customer's water glass. By 1:45, her nerves were so frayed that Sarah took one look at her and said, "Go take your break, honey. You're making me nervous just watching you." At 2:15, Danielle pushed open the cafe door, her heart thundering. Sure enough, there he sat by the window, just like Tina said. Afternoon light caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. A notebook lay open before him, and he wrote with careful concentration, pausing occasionally to sip his coffee. He looked up as she approached, and Danielle's carefully prepared speech vanished from her mind. Those eyes, how had she not noticed them yesterday? They were a warm brown, gentle and steady, with tiny crinkles at the corners that spoke of both laughter and sadness. "Hi," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello." His smile was kind, no trace of yesterday's incident in his expression. "Would you like to sit?" Yes, thank you." She slid into the chair across from him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I got your note. I wanted to apologize again, properly this time. What I did was completely unacceptable, and I'm so sorry. Already forgotten," he said, closing his notebook. "Though I have to admit it was quite an introduction to small-town life." A startled laugh escaped her. "Not our finest moment as a community. Are you new here then?" "Moved in about a week ago." He took a sip of coffee. "I'm volunteering at the Veterans Center on Oak Street. Needed a change of pace, and this seemed like a good place to find it." "The Veterans Center?" Danielle's eyebrows rose. "That's wonderful. They do such important work there." "They do." Something flickered in his eyes. Pride, maybe, or purpose. "It's not much, but if I can help even one person find their way back to civilian life—" "That's more than not much," Danielle said firmly. "That's everything to someone who needs it." His smile widened slightly. "You sound like you speak from experience." "My father was a veteran," she admitted. "The center helped him a lot, especially near the end." She swallowed hard, pushing away the memory. "I'm sorry," he said softly, and she could tell he meant it. "Thank you." She straightened, determined to lighten the mood. "Look, please let me buy you a coffee. It's the least I can do after." She gestured vaguely at his cheek. "Only if you'll join me for one, too." His eyes twinkled. I promise to duck if you make any sudden movements." Danielle's laugh surprised her with its genuineness. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? Weeks? Months? "Deal," she said, signaling to Tina for 2 coffees. She caught her friend's knowing grin and chose to ignore it. As Tina brought their drinks, Danielle noticed Elijah's hands wrapped around his cup. A long scar ran across his right hand, from knuckles to wrist, silver white against his tan skin. He saw her looking and flexed his fingers slightly. "Rehabilitation can be a slow process," he said quietly. "But every scar tells a story of healing, doesn't it?" Something in his voice made her look up sharply, but his expression remained gentle, free of judgment. She had the unsettling feeling he wasn't just talking about physical scars. They talked for nearly an hour, about the town, the Veterans Center, the way the cafe's coffee got stronger as the day went on. His quiet strength and self-deprecating humor drew her out of her shell bit by bit. When he described his first attempt at operating the center's ancient coffee maker, which ended with him wearing most of the coffee, Danielle found herself laughing again, the sound surprising her each time. Danielle's keys jangled as she unlocked her apartment door, humming softly to herself. The familiar scent of her mother's lavender air freshener greeted her as she stepped inside. Their small 2-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but they'd made it home with cheerful curtains, family photos, and potted plants that somehow survived despite Danielle's less-than-green thumb. "Is that you, baby?" Violet's voice called from the living room. "Yeah, Mama?" Danielle dropped her purse on the kitchen counter and headed toward her mother's voice. She found Violet in her favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on her nose as she worked on a crossword puzzle. Violet looked up, her eyebrows rising as she took in Danielle's expression. "Well, would you look at that? My daughter's actually smiling for once. Did they finally fix that broken coffee machine at the cafe?" "The machine's still broken," Danielle said, dropping onto the couch. "Can't I just be in a good mood?" "Honey, I've seen thunderclouds more cheerful than you've been lately." Violet set aside her puzzle. "Not that I'm complaining, mind you. It's nice to see some light in those eyes again." "Mama." Danielle rolled her eyes, but couldn't quite suppress her smile. "Does this good mood have anything to do with that handsome stranger Tina told me about? The one you assaulted?" Violet's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I didn't." Danielle groaned. Tina needs to learn to keep her mouth shut. And no, it doesn't. Violet's knowing look said she didn't believe a word of it. "Well, whatever, or whoever, is responsible, I'm grateful. It's been too long since I've seen you smile like that." Later that evening, Danielle hurried into the church basement for choir practice, her music folder tucked under her arm. The familiar space buzzed with conversation as people settled into their usual spots, the fluorescent lights casting a warm glow over the worn carpet and folding chairs. She had just taken her place in the alto section when the basement door burst open. Tina practically flew down the stairs, her eyes wide with excitement. She made a beeline for Danielle, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a corner. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God!" Tina whispered, her words tumbling over each other. "You are not going to believe what I just found out." "Tina, we're about to start. That man from the cafe, the one you slapped?" Tina's voice dropped even lower. "His name is Elijah Morgan, as in Morgan Industries, as in the multi-billion-dollar company based in Atlanta." Danielle felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "My cousin works security at their headquarters. She saw his picture on my Facebook and nearly had a heart attack. He's the heir to the whole empire." Tina's eyes were practically sparking. "You slapped a billionaire!" "No." Danielle shook her head. "No, that can't be right. He volunteers at the Veterans Center. He drinks regular coffee and writes in notebooks. He's..." trying to live like a normal person, apparently. Tina pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Look. The web page showed a corporate photo of Elijah in an expensive suit, looking more polished but unmistakably the same man. The article headline read, "Morgan Industries heir steps down as CEO following personal tragedy." Danielle's legs felt weak. She sank into a nearby chair, her music folder slipping from her grip and scattering sheets across the floor. The quiet, kind man who had forgiven her so easily, who had made her laugh for the first time in months. He was one of the wealthiest people in Georgia? "Ladies." Mrs. Peterson, the choir director, clapped her hands. "Positions, please." Danielle went through practice in a daze, her voice mechanical as they rehearsed their hymns. By the time she got home, her phone was buzzing with notifications. Someone had posted about the incident at the cafe, connecting it to Elijah's identity. The post was spreading like wildfire through their small town's social media. She barely slept that night. The next morning, she noticed people staring as she walked to work. A teenager stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to take her picture. At the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. That's her, the girl who slapped the billionaire. When she arrived at the cafe for her shift, her boss, Mr. Mason, called her into his office. The small room felt stifling as he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Danielle, you're one of my best workers," he began, fidgeting with a pen on his desk. "But this situation, well, it's drawing a lot of attention. We need to keep things quiet, understand? Can't have people thinking it's okay to assault customers, even if they are billionaires trying to live incognito." "Yes, sir," she whispered, shame burning in her chest. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she tensed, expecting to see lawyers with cease and desist orders or reporters hungry for a story. The peace she'd finally started to feel after meeting Elijah, really meeting him, not just slapping him, crumbled away like dried leaves. By closing time, her hands shook as she counted her tips. 3 different customers had tried to secretly film her. Someone had left a note asking for an interview about her encounter with Elijah Morgan. Even Tina's usual chatter couldn't lift her spirits. Maybe it's not so bad. Tina tried, watching Danielle wipe down tables with more force than necessary. I mean, he seemed really nice about everything. He's not going to sue you or anything. That's not the point. Danielle's voice cracked. For just a moment, I thought I'd met someone who... She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. It doesn't matter. Nothing about that conversation was real. He probably thought I was just another small-town charity case, someone to practice his volunteering on. Danny, I need to go home. Danielle untied her apron with trembling fingers. Mama needs her evening medications, and I should check on Tommy's homework. But as she walked home in the gathering dusk, each step felt heavier than the last. The simple joy of yesterday's coffee conversation seemed like a dream now, tainted by the reality of who Elijah Morgan really was. The distance between their worlds stretched like an unbridgeable chasm, making her initial mistake of slapping him seem even more mortifying. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification about a social media post mentioning her. She switched it off without looking, fighting back tears as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. The peaceful smile she'd worn just that morning felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who hadn't yet learned that some mistakes can't be fixed with just a simple apology and a cup of coffee. The Veterans Center stood as a humble brick building on the edge of town, its American flag gently swaying in the warm Georgia breeze. Danielle paused at the entrance, smoothing her simple blue dress and taking a deep breath. The annual Veterans Support Day had been her father's favorite community event. Now, 6 years after his passing, she still attended faithfully in his memory. Inside, the main hall buzzed with activity. Folding tables lined the walls, stacked with care packages and donated supplies. Volunteers moved about, sorting items and checking lists. The familiar scene usually brought her comfort, but today Danielle's stomach churned with anxiety. After 3 days of being the town's hottest gossip topic, she'd grown weary of the stares and whispers. "Did you hear about her?" A woman's voice carried from nearby. "The one who— Now, Martha, let's focus on our work." Another volunteer cut in, but the damage was done. Danielle's cheeks burned as she hurried toward the registration table. She'd just signed in when a familiar voice made her freeze. "Miss Brooks?" She turned slowly. There stood Elijah Morgan, dressed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking nothing like the corporate photo that had circulated online. He carried a box of medical supplies, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, marked with what looked like old burn scars. "Mr. Morgan," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect— Please, just Elijah." His smile was gentle, unchanged from their cafe conversation. "Would you mind helping me sort these supplies? The labels need checking against inventory." Before she could answer, he was already walking toward an empty table, as if assuming she'd follow. And somehow she did. They worked in silence for a few minutes, Danielle's hands trembling slightly as she arranged ace bandages and reading glasses. All around them, she could feel people watching, their curious gazes burning into her back. "Are you holding up okay?" Elijah asked quietly, his focus seemingly on the supplies. "I've heard the town's been talkative." Danielle's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "About everything. The slap was bad enough, but now your privacy is ruined and your reputation—" "My reputation?" Elijah's laugh was soft and genuine. Maybe it needed shaking up. He paused his sorting, turning to face her fully. "Do you know what people usually say about me? Poor man, lost his wife, abandoned his company, must be having a breakdown. At least now they're talking about something different." His honesty caught her off guard. The pain in his voice when he mentioned his wife made her heart ache, reminding her that wealth didn't shield anyone from loss. "Still," she insisted, "you didn't deserve any of this attention. You were just trying to live quietly. And you were just trying to protect yourself from someone who hurt you." He countered gently. "Sometimes our deepest wounds make us act in ways we regret." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued working. Danielle found herself relaxing slightly, falling into an easy rhythm of sorting and checking items. "Your mother," Elijah said after a while. "I heard she's been having trouble with mobility since her fall last year." Danielle stiffened. "How did you—" "Small town." He smiled apologetically. "But I actually wanted to tell you, we have excellent physiotherapists here at the center. They mainly work with veterans, but we have open slots. I'd like to offer her some sessions, free of charge." "Oh no, I couldn't." "Please," he interrupted softly. "Let me do this. Not out of pity or obligation, but because helping people is what this place is about. Your father was a veteran, wasn't he?" Tears pricked at Danielle's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "He volunteered here until the day he died." "Then consider it honoring his memory." Looking into Elijah's earnest eyes, Danielle found herself nodding. "Thank you," she managed. "Mama will be so grateful." They spent the next hour working together, their conversation flowing more easily. Elijah told her about the veterans' programs, his eyes lighting up when describing success stories. Danielle shared memories of her father volunteering, finding comfort in how attentively Elijah listened. By the time she left the center, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. The stares and whispers hadn't stopped. but somehow they seemed less important. At home, she found her mother in her favorite armchair, reading her well-worn Bible. "You're late, sugar," Violet noted, marking her page. "Everything okay at the center?" Danielle sat on the ottoman at her mother's feet, just as she had as a child. She told Violet everything, about seeing Elijah, his kindness, the offer of physiotherapy. Violet listened thoughtfully, her wise eyes studying her daughter's face. "Sounds like quite a man," she said finally. "You know what I think? Some people are angels sent to test if we still believe in grace." "Mama," Danielle protested weakly. "I'm just saying." Violet patted her hand, "that sometimes God works in mysterious ways, even through accidental slaps." Later that night, Danielle lay in bed, sleep eluding her. Her thoughts kept returning to Elijah, his quiet strength, the sadness behind his eyes when he mentioned his wife, the way he spoke about helping others with such passion. She couldn't reconcile the wealthy heir from the articles with the humble man who spent his days sorting donated supplies. The moonlight filtered through her curtains, casting gentle shadows on her wall. Despite her best efforts to remain cautious, she felt something shifting in her heart, a reluctant admiration for this man who had every right to be angry with her, but chose kindness instead. Rolling onto her side, Danielle watched the digital clock tick past midnight, its red numbers blurring as her mind raced with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Sleep remained distant, held at bay by the memory of Elijah's gentle smile and the warmth in his eyes when he spoke of healing and hope. The Veterans Center sat on the outskirts of town, a red brick building surrounded by towering oak trees. Danielle helped her mother up the wheelchair ramp, trying not to hover, too much as Violet insisted on using her walker. "I'm not completely helpless yet, sugar," Violet said with a determined smile. "Just a little slower than I used to be." Inside, they found Elijah waiting in the therapy room, his sleeves rolled up and a gentle expression on his face. "Mrs. Brooks?" he greeted warmly. "Welcome to our humble facility." "Now, none of that Mrs. Brooks business," Violet declared. "You call me Violet, young man. Anyone kind enough to help these old bones deserves to use my first name." Elijah's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Violet it is, then." Over the next hour, Danielle watched as Elijah worked with her mother, demonstrating exercises with infinite patience. His hands were steady and sure as he guided Violet through each movement, explaining the purpose behind every stretch and rotation. "The key is consistency," he explained, helping Violet bend her knee. "Small movements, done regularly, can make a world of difference." "Like prayer," Violet mused. "Little conversations with the Lord, day after day, changing us bit by bit." Elijah paused, considering her words. "That's exactly right. Healing happens in those small, faithful moments." Danielle noticed how naturally her mother and Elijah fell into conversation. They traded Bible verses like old friends sharing recipes, finding comfort in familiar words. "Remember Psalm 23, verse 3? Violet asked during a rest period. "He restores my soul and leads me in paths of righteousness," Elijah completed softly, "for his name's sake." As the days passed, their sessions became something Danielle looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. She learned to read the subtle signs of Elijah's moods, how his shoulders carried tension on harder days, how his smile grew more genuine when sharing stories about the veterans he helped. During one session, while Violet worked with another therapist, Elijah sat beside Danielle in the waiting area. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "3 years ago, I was supposed to pick up my wife from the airport." His fingers twisted the plain gold band he still wore. "I got caught in a board meeting that ran late. She took a taxi instead. The driver fell asleep at the wheel." Danielle's heart ached at the raw pain in his voice. Elijah, I'm so sorry. I was always putting work first. He continued. Morgan Industries was everything. Stock prices, quarterly reports, endless meetings. After Sarah died, none of it mattered anymore. Every headline felt like a mockery. Morganair leads company to record profits while I couldn't even... He trailed off, swallowing hard. So you came here. Danielle finished gently. I came here hoping to remember what life felt like before it became a headline. He admitted. Before everything was about money and image and expectations. Danielle thought about her own struggles with public scrutiny since the slapping incident. And are you? Remembering? Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe I'm remembering now. Later that afternoon, as the Georgia sun painted the sky in shades of amber, they sat on a bench outside the clinic. Elijah had surprised them with ice cream from the local parlor, vanilla for Violet, butter pecan for Danielle, and chocolate for himself. Now this is what I call therapy, Violet declared, savoring her treat. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the nearby garden. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. Danielle stole glances at Elijah, noting how the golden light softened his features. He seemed more at peace here, away from the weight of his family name and fortune. Violet dozed off in her wheelchair, her empty ice cream cup tilted in her lap. Danielle moved to wake her, but Elijah touched her arm gently. Let her rest, he murmured. The exercises take more out of her than she likes to admit. Danielle settled back, acutely aware of the warmth where his hand had briefly rested. Thank you, she said quietly, for all of this, for being so kind to us after everything. You don't need to keep thanking me, he replied. Being here, helping people like your mother, listening to her wisdom, it's healing me too. The silence between them felt different now, warm and full of unspoken possibilities. It wasn't the awkward quiet of strangers or the tense silence after conflict. Instead, it felt sacred, like the hush in church just before the choir begins to sing. They watched as the last rays of sunlight painted the clouds pink and purple. A mockingbird called from a nearby tree, its evening song a gentle reminder that beauty could be found in the simplest moments. Danielle realized she felt truly at peace for the first time in years. The gossip around town, the whispers and stares, they seemed distant and unimportant in this moment. Here, with the cooling evening air and the remnants of ice cream sweetness on her tongue, she understood what her mother meant about angels and grace. Beside her, Elijah's presence was solid and reassuring. His shoulders had lost their usual tension, and his expression was open, unguarded. In the fading light, he wasn't Elijah Morgan, heir to a fortune. He was simply a man finding his way back to life, one small act of kindness at a time. Violet stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like a prayer. The moment held them there, mother, daughter, and the stranger who wasn't really a stranger anymore, wrapped in the gentle embrace of a Georgia evening, sharing something that felt remarkably like hope. The days melted into weeks with the gentle rhythm of Georgia summer. After Violet's therapy sessions, Danielle and Elijah fell into an easy routine of sharing coffee at Mason's Cafe. Their corner table by the window became their sanctuary, where steam rose from ceramic mugs and conversation flowed naturally. I still can't believe you drink it. Black, Danielle teased one afternoon, stirring cream into her own cup. Not even a hint of sugar? Elijah's eyes crinkled at the corners. Some things are better pure and simple, he said, then added with a playful glint. though I won't judge your sugar with a side of coffee." These moments felt precious to Danielle, the way he listened intently when she spoke about her son's latest school adventure, or how he remembered exactly how she liked her coffee. Sometimes their hands would brush, reaching for sugar packets, and the touch would linger just a moment too long. One day, while walking home from the cafe, they passed by Danielle's house. Her father's old garden shed stood in the backyard, its weathered walls leaning slightly, paint peeling like old memories. "That needs fixing," Elijah observed, studying the crooked door. Danielle sighed. "Daddy always meant to repair it. He kept his tools in there, old fishing gear too. Now it's just—" She trailed off, remembering weekends spent watching her father tinker with lawn mowers and tell stories. "I could help," Elijah offered quietly. When she looked surprised, he smiled. "I wasn't always in boardrooms. My grandfather taught me carpentry when I was young, said a man should know how to work with his hands." That weekend, Elijah showed up in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking nothing like the corporate air the town whispered about. He carried a toolbox and wore work gloves that had clearly seen use. Danielle watched, amazed, as he assessed the shed's damage with knowing eyes. "The foundation's solid," he explained, kneeling to check the base. "It's mainly the walls and roof that need work. Your father built this well." They worked together through the warm afternoons. Elijah taught her how to replace rotted boards, their hands meeting over hammer and nails. He showed unexpected skill with power tools, and Danielle found herself watching the sure movement of his hands, the concentration in his eyes. The town still buzzed with gossip. Smartphones appeared whenever they were seen together, and social media hummed with speculation. But within the sanctuary of her backyard, none of that seemed to matter. "Let them talk," Elijah said one day, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sometimes the best things grow in the shade of other people's judgment." One evening, dark clouds gathered suddenly overhead. They were finishing up for the day when the first fat drops fell. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "We should wait it out," Elijah suggested, closing the shed door just as the sky opened up. Rain drummed against the newly repaired roof, creating a metallic symphony. Danielle stood near the workbench, hyper-aware of his presence in the small space. The air felt charged, and not just from the storm. Through the window, lightning illuminated his face in brief, bright flashes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping with all this. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied simply. Then, after a pause, "You remind me that there's more to life than balance sheets and board meetings. When I'm here, I'm just me." A crack of thunder made Danielle jump. Her hands trembled slightly, and not just from the storm. The close quarters brought back memories of Trevor, his angry words, his manipulation, the way he'd made her feel small. Elijah noticed her distress. "What's wrong?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm terrified," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not of the storm, of this, of trusting again." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Trevor, my ex, he was so charming at first, said all the right things. Then he started picking me apart, piece by piece, made me doubt everything about myself. By the time he left, I was empty." Elijah didn't move closer, giving her space. He just listened, really listened, his eyes full of understanding rather than pity. "He took money from my son's college fund," she continued. "Said he was investing it. Then he disappeared, left me with nothing but shame and doubt." Her voice cracked. That's why I slapped you that day. You looked so much like him. And all that pain just—" Another thunderclap made her flinch. This time, Elijah stepped forward slowly, telegraphing his movement. He gently took her hand in his, his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said softly. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, grounding her. "It's okay to let the walls down sometimes." The simple touch brought tears to her eyes. Not from fear this time, but from relief. The rain continued its steady pattern on the tin roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. They stood like that for a long while, hand in hand in the dim light. The silence between them felt almost holy, full of understanding and unspoken healing. Elijah didn't try to fix things with empty words or promises. He simply held her hand and shared her silence, letting her know she wasn't alone. When the storm finally passed, the air smelled of wet earth and new possibilities. That night, as Danielle lay in bed listening to the last drops falling, she dreamed of Elijah. Not as the wealthy heir plastered across business magazines, but as the man who fixed her father's shed. The man who knew when to be quiet. The man who held her hand and understood that sometimes healing comes in the spaces between words. In her dream, they sat together on the shed's workbench, surrounded by her father's old tools and the honest smell of wood shavings. No pretense, no expectations, just two people finding their way back to trust, one rainy evening at a time. The morning sun filtered through Danielle's kitchen window as she sorted through her mail, steam rising from her coffee cup. Bills, advertisements, and then her heart stopped. The official-looking envelope bore the county seal. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. Notice of foreclosure. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. From Father's community garden, the patch of earth he'd transformed from an empty lot into a haven for neighborhood children, was being sold to developers. 30 days' notice. The paper shook in her hands. Memories flooded back. Her father teaching kids how to plant tomatoes, showing them how to tell when squash was ready to pick, explaining why bees were friends, not enemies. The garden had been his legacy, a place where children could learn about growth and patience, where families without means could grow fresh food. Now it would become another concrete parking lot. She grabbed her phone, needing to talk to someone who would understand. Her fingers hovered over Elijah's name. They'd exchanged numbers during the shed repairs, but she'd never actually called him. Taking a deep breath, she pressed dial. "Danielle." His voice was warm, concerned. "Everything okay?" "The garden," she managed, her voice breaking. "They're selling Daddy's garden." "I'll be there in 15 minutes. True to his word, Elijah arrived quickly, looking worried in jeans and a simple blue shirt. Danielle led him to her small kitchen table, where the foreclosure notice lay like a wound. $300,000, she said hollowly. "That's what they want for the land. The developer already has plans for a strip mall." She laughed bitterly. "Might as well ask for the moon." Elijah studied the notice carefully. "Don't lose hope yet," he said softly. "Sometimes solutions come from unexpected places." Hope. Danielle stood up, pacing. "That garden feeds dozens of families. The kids learn science there, responsibility. Some of them don't have yards at home. Where will they go now?" "Tell me more about it," Elijah said, his voice gentle. "About your father's vision." As Danielle talked, describing her father's dreams and the garden's impact on the community, she didn't notice Elijah taking mental notes. She didn't see him typing quick messages on his phone when she turned to make fresh coffee. Later that afternoon, she visited her mother for their daily checkup. Violet was doing remarkably well, her mobility improving steadily thanks to the therapy sessions at the Veterans Center. "Look at this," Violet said proudly, standing up from her chair without using her cane. She took several steady steps across the living room. "That tall man with the soft eyes knows his business. Danielle couldn't help smiling, despite her heavy heart. His name is Elijah, Mama. Oh, I know his name. Violet's eyes twinkled. I also know how he looks at you when you're not watching. Mama! Danielle felt her cheeks warm. It's not like that. Violet settled back in her chair. That's why you smile every time your phone buzzes? Because it's not like that? He's just kind. Danielle protested weakly. Besides, he's way out of my league. Baby girl, Violet said softly. The only leagues that matter are the ones we create in our minds. That man sees you, really sees you. And from where I'm sitting, that's worth more than any bank account. Danielle busied herself adjusting her mother's pillows, pretending not to care. But her mother's words echoed in her mind as she drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Pulling into her driveway, she noticed something white in her mailbox. Strange. The mail had already come that morning. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, heavy and expensive feeling. Her name was written in elegant calligraphy. Inside, she found an invitation. You are cordially invited to the Faith Grove Benefit Dinner, an evening of community, hope, and new beginnings. Saturday, 7 o'clock at the Grand Pavilion. The invitation was unsigned, with no mention of who was hosting. A small note fell out. Formal attire required. Your presence is especially requested. Danielle turned the invitation over, searching for more information. The Grand Pavilion was the fanciest venue in town, usually reserved for weddings and corporate events. Who would be hosting a benefit dinner there? And why had she been specifically invited? She went inside, setting the invitation on her counter. The day's emotions caught up with her. The devastating news about the garden, Elijah's quiet support, her mother's knowing looks, and now this mysterious invitation. It felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. Hope your day got better. Remember what I said about not losing hope? Danielle smiled despite herself, typing back. Thank you for listening earlier. It meant a lot. Always, came his quick reply. She looked at the invitation again, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. Faith Grove. Wasn't that the original name of her father's garden, before everyone started calling it the community garden? But that was years ago. Few people would remember that detail. The evening settled around her as she made dinner, her mind turning over the day's events. The foreclosure notice sat heavy in her drawer, but somehow Elijah's words kept coming back to her. Don't lose hope yet. There was something in his voice when he'd said it, a certainty that made her want to believe. She didn't notice the lights still on at the Veterans Center, where Elijah sat at his desk making calls, organizing what would become the biggest fundraising event their small town had ever seen. She didn't see him writing emails to his old business contacts, calling in favors, or coordinating with local businesses. She had no idea that across town people were already coming together, inspired by the quiet man who'd shown up one day and started changing things with his gentle presence. Instead, she stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The invitation sat on her counter, its mystery waiting to be revealed. Whatever came next, she realized she was no longer facing it alone. The sound of crickets filled the warm, evening air, a peaceful chorus that seemed to whisper, "Wait and see, wait and see." Sometimes hope comes quietly, wearing work boots and carrying a toolbox. Sometimes it arrives in a cream-colored envelope, unsigned but full of possibility. Danielle stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress she'd bought on clearance last year. It was simple but elegant, with a modest neckline and flowing skirt that reached just below her knees. She'd never had a reason to wear it before tonight. You look beautiful, baby girl. Violet called from the doorway, leaning on her cane. Her mother wore her best church dress, a cream-colored outfit with delicate pearl buttons, though you might want to breathe occasionally. Danielle realized she'd been holding her breath. I just feel so out of place going to the Grand Pavilion, all those wealthy people. Money doesn't make the person. Violet reminded her, adjusting her daughter's necklace, a silver cross that had belonged to Danielle's grandmother. Your worth isn't measured in dollars. The drive to the venue was quiet, streetlights casting warm glows through the car windows. Danielle's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with questions about the mysterious benefit dinner. When they pulled up to the Grand Pavilion, valets in crisp uniforms waited to park cars that cost more than her yearly salary. Lord, give me strength, Danielle muttered, helping her mother from the passenger seat. The Grand Pavilion lived up to its name. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light reflecting off marble floors. Well-dressed guests mingled, their jewelry catching the light. Danielle recognized some local business owners, but most faces were unfamiliar, clearly out-of-towners with means. An usher guided them to their table, surprisingly close to the stage. Danielle felt eyes on her, heard whispers. Was she imagining it, or did people recognize her as the woman who slapped a billionaire? Stop fidgeting, Violet whispered, patting her hand. You belong here as much as anyone. Danielle's eyes wandered the room, searching for a familiar face, for Elijah. But he was nowhere to be seen. The tables were decorated with centerpieces, featuring flowers she recognized from her father's garden. Black-eyed Susans and purple cone flowers. Something about that detail made her throat tight. As more guests filed in, the lights dimmed slightly. Danielle looked up at the stage and froze. There, hanging above it, was a banner that made her heart stop. Saving Faith Grove, preserving our community's heart, Faith Grove. Her father's garden, the name he'd chosen when he first broke ground 20 years ago, wanting to create a place where faith could grow alongside the vegetables. How had they known? Before she could process this, the room quieted as someone approached the microphone. Elijah Morgan stepped onto the stage, looking dignified but approachable in a dark suit. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. Good evening, he began, his voice warm and sincere. Thank you all for coming tonight. Some of you traveled quite far to be here, and your presence means more than you know. Danielle's pulse quickened as she listened. A few weeks ago, I learned about a special place in our community, a garden that's more than just land and plants. It's a legacy of love, started by a man who believed every child deserved a place to grow, learn, and belong. Tears pricked at Danielle's eyes. Her father's face flashed in her memory, dirt on his cheeks, teaching neighborhood kids how to plant tomatoes. When I heard this garden was at risk, Elijah continued, I saw an opportunity not just to save a piece of land, but to preserve a vision. Thanks to your incredible generosity tonight, I'm honored to announce that we've raised more than enough to purchase the property and establish a trust to maintain it for generations to come. Faith Grove will continue to be a place where hope takes root. The room erupted in applause, but Danielle barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. It hit her all at once, the invitation, the flowers, the banner, Elijah's promise not to lose hope. He'd done this. He'd organized all of it. Her chair scraped back. She was vaguely aware of her mother calling her name, but she couldn't stay. The emotions were too big, too overwhelming. She hurried toward the backstage area, tears flowing freely now. In the dimly lit space behind the stage, surrounded by sound equipment and stacked chairs, Danielle finally let herself break down. The sobs came from deep inside, not just for tonight, but for every struggle, every moment of feeling alone, every time she'd wanted to give up but couldn't. Danielle. She turned to find Elijah standing there, concern etched on his features. In the soft backstage lighting, he looked less like a billionaire and more like the man who'd fixed her father's garden shed, who'd made her mother laugh during therapy, who'd listened when she needed it most. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why would you do all this?" He stepped closer, his eyes sincere. "I didn't do this to impress you," he said softly. "I did it because I believe in what your father built, in what you're fighting to preserve. Some things are worth more than money. They're worth fighting for." The simple truth in his words broke something open in her heart. Without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged him. It was their first embrace, and she felt his initial surprise melt into gentle acceptance as his arms wrapped around her. "No one's ever believed in me like that," she whispered against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Neither of them noticed the quick flash of a camera through the curtain gap or heard the soft click of a phone capturing their moment. They were lost in something bigger, a moment of pure understanding, of walls finally crumbling, of trust blooming like the flowers in Faith Grove. In that backstage sanctuary, surrounded by shadows and equipment, two hearts that had been scarred by life found a moment of perfect healing. The garden that had brought them together would continue to grow, but something else was taking root too, something tender and unexpected, something neither had dared to hope for. Outside, the benefit dinner continued, glasses clinking and conversations flowing. But backstage, in a simple embrace, two souls who had forgotten how to trust were learning to believe again. The morning sun barely peeked through Danielle's curtains when her phone started buzzing incessantly. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was her regular morning alerts. But the notifications kept coming, a steady stream that wouldn't stop. Rubbing sleep from her eyes, she reached for her phone. The moment she saw the headline, her stomach dropped. "Billionaire's new flame? The woman who slapped him wins his heart." Below it was the photo from last night, her and Elijah embracing backstage, his arms wrapped protectively around her, her face buried in his shoulder. The image looked intimate, almost romantic, caught in the dim lighting. "No, no, no," she whispered, sitting up so quickly her head spun. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments. Gold digger. She planned this from the start. First she slaps him, now she's hanging all over him. Snake. Bet she staged that whole slap thing. The cruel words blurred together as tears filled her eyes. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "How much did you charge him for that hug?" Another. "Hope you're proud of yourself, using a good man like that." The messages kept coming, each one a fresh cut to her already bleeding heart. She tried blocking the numbers, but new ones appeared. Some people had even found her social media accounts, flooding them with nasty comments. Her mother's gentle knock made her jump. "Danielle, have you seen the news?" "Mom, I can't." Her voice cracked. "I can't deal with this right now." "Sweetheart, open the door." Violet's calm presence was like a balm as she entered, sitting beside Danielle on the bed. She took one look at the phone and gently removed it from her daughter's trembling hands. "People can be cruel when they don't understand," Violet said softly, pulling Danielle into a hug. "But their words only have the power we give them." "It wasn't like that," Danielle whispered. "The hug, it was just, he'd done something so kind and I was overwhelmed. You don't need to explain yourself to me, baby, or to anyone else." But the world demanded explanations. By the time Danielle arrived at work, the story had spread through every local news outlet. Some had dug up the original slap incident, creating a narrative that painted her as either a calculating opportunist or a modern Cinderella, depending on their angle. The cafe was busier than usual, filled with people who seemed more interested in staring at her than eating. She could feel their eyes following her as she moved between tables, hear their whispered conversations. "Just ignore them," Tina advised, squeezing her arm as they passed in the kitchen. "This'll blow over soon." But it didn't blow over. Instead, it got worse. The bell above the door chimed around noon, and Danielle's blood ran cold. Trevor Lang stood in the doorway, wearing that familiar smirk that had once charmed her and now made her sick to her stomach. He looked exactly as she remembered: perfectly styled hair, expensive-looking clothes that were probably bought on credit, and that predatory gleam in his eyes. "Well, well," he drawled, approaching the counter where she stood frozen. "Look who's moving up in the world." "Get out," she managed to say, though her voice shook. "You're not welcome here." Is that any way to treat an old friend? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Especially one who has such interesting memories to share. Those private photos you sent me back then, bet the tabloids would love those." The color drained from Danielle's face. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." His smile was sharp as a knife. "Unless, of course, you'd like to make a deal. Your new boyfriend seems pretty generous. I'm sure you could convince him to help out an old friend." "He's not my—" Danielle started, but Trevor cut her off. $5,000. Consider it insurance against those photos going public. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it." Before Danielle could respond, the cafe door opened again. Elijah stood there, his usual calm expression darkening as he took in the scene before him. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, moving to stand beside Danielle. Trevor's smile widened. "Perfect timing. I was just catching up with my ex. She's quite the social climber, isn't she? First me, now you, though I have to admit, she's aimed higher this time." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I suggest you leave, now." "Or what?" Trevor laughed. "You know she's just after your wallet, right? That's her thing, playing the sweet, innocent victim until she gets what she wants. Ask her about the money she borrowed from me. Ask her about—" The punch happened so fast that Danielle barely saw it. One moment Trevor was speaking, the next he was stumbling backward, blood trickling from his nose. Elijah stood with his fist still clenched, that careful composure completely shattered. "You son of a—" Trevor lunged forward, but security guards from the shopping center were already rushing in, alerted by the commotion. The cafe erupted in chaos. Phones came out, recording everything. Customers scattered. The security guards separated Trevor and Elijah, but the damage was done. Danielle stood amid the chaos, her world spinning. This was everything she'd feared. Violence, public scandal, her past coming back to haunt her. And now Elijah, who'd been nothing but kind, had been dragged into her mess. "Danielle," Elijah said, trying to reach for her as the security guards held him back. "Let me explain." "No." She wrapped her arms around herself, stepping back. "Just leave me alone, please. All of this, it's too much. I can't do this!" The hurt that flashed across his face was almost unbearable. She watched his expression shift from concern to understanding to resignation. "If that's what you want," he said quietly. She couldn't speak, could only nod. Trevor was still shouting threats as the guards escorted him out, but she barely heard him. All she could focus on was Elijah's retreating back as he walked away, his shoulders heavy with defeat. The cafe fell silent. Tina appeared at her side, offering support, but Danielle couldn't move. The morning's cruel messages, Trevor's threats, the look in Elijah's eyes, it all swirled together in a storm of pain and regret. She'd pushed away the one person who'd shown her genuine kindness, all because she was afraid. Afraid of the gossip, afraid of her past, afraid of letting anyone close enough to hurt her again. But watching Elijah walk away, she wondered if she hadn't just hurt herself worst of all. The days after the cafe incident dragged like molasses in winter. Danielle moved through her routine mechanically. Wake up, help Mum with medications, work, home, sleep, repeat. The world kept turning, but her heart felt stuck in that terrible moment when Elijah walked away. Mason's cafe buzzed with the usual breakfast crowd, but everything felt different. Danielle poured coffee and took orders, forcing smiles that never quite reached her eyes. The regular customers, bless their hearts, pretended not to notice how her hands sometimes shook when she heard the door chime. "Sugar, you're going to wear yourself out holding all that hurt inside," Tina said one morning, catching Danielle staring at the window seat where Elijah used to sit. "Have you heard the latest?" Danielle shook her head, dreading more gossip about herself. "He quit." Tina's voice was soft but firm. "Morgan Industries called a board meeting, wanted him to make a public statement denouncing you, clear the company's name from all this mess. You know what he did? Handed in his resignation right there. Walked out of that fancy Atlanta office and hasn't looked back." The coffee pot in Danielle's hand nearly slipped. What? My cousin works security there," said Elijah told them. "I won't throw an innocent woman under the bus to save face." Then he just left. Tina squeezed her friend's shoulder. "He's staying up at that old Carter cabin, out past the creek. Been there almost a week now." Danielle's chest tightened. She remembered that cabin, a beautiful old place nestled in the pines, where the Carters used to host church picnics before they moved to Florida. The thought of Elijah there, alone, after giving up everything. "I need some air," she whispered, heading for the back door. In the alley behind the cafe, Danielle leaned against the brick wall, letting the cool morning air wash over her face. A man had just given up billions of dollars, his family legacy, rather than say one unkind word about her. The same man who'd saved her father's garden, who'd helped her mother heal, who'd looked at her like she was worth so much more than her mistakes. And she'd pushed him away. That evening, Danielle sat with her mother in their small living room, pretending to watch television while her thoughts wandered. Violet, sharp as ever despite her physical limitations, muted the TV. "Baby girl," she said, her voice gentle but knowing. "When are you going to stop punishing yourself?" "Mama, I'm not—" "You are!" Violet reached for her daughter's hand. "You think I don't see how you're hurting? How you check your phone when you think I'm not looking, hoping for a message from him?" Danielle's eyes welled up. "It's complicated, Mama. Love usually is." Violet shifted in her chair, wincing slightly as she found a more comfortable position. "You know what I've learned in my 68 years? If love comes wrapped in trouble, unwrap it, don't throw it away. The best gifts often come in the messiest packages. But what if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow? What if the rain falls up instead of down?" Violet's eyes twinkled. "We can what-if ourselves right out of every blessing God sends our way. That man showed you who he is through his actions, not just his words. And honey, actions speak volumes." Danielle wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm scared, Mama." "Of course you are. Fear is natural. But faith is supernatural." Violet squeezed her daughter's hand. "And sometimes faith means taking one small step, even when you can't see the whole path ahead." The next few days passed in a blur of work and reflection. Every time Danielle drove past the community garden, now safely preserved thanks to Elijah's intervention, her heart tugged a little harder. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, she found herself pulling into the garden's gravel parking lot. The place was quiet, peaceful. Late summer flowers nodded in the breeze, and the wooden sign her father had carved still stood proud. Faith Grove Community Garden, growing hope together. Now, thanks to Elijah's quiet generosity, it would stay standing for years to come. Danielle walked the familiar paths, remembering how her father used to tell stories about each plant, each vegetable bed. How he'd say every seed held a miracle, just waiting for the right moment to sprout. Near the back fence, she knelt in the soft earth, not caring about her Sunday dress. "Lord," she whispered, tears flowing freely now, "I don't know what to do. I'm so tired of being afraid, so tired of letting the past poison my future. Please, teach me to forgive. Teach me to forgive Trevor, to forgive myself. Show me how to trust again, even when I'm scared." As she wiped her eyes, something caught her attention. There, in the soil beside her knee, a tiny green shoot pushed through the earth. Danielle's breath caught. It was exactly where she and Elijah had planted that sunflower seed weeks ago, the day he'd first helped her in the garden. "Sometimes," he'd said then, pressing the seed into the soil, "the strongest things grow from the smallest beginnings." She touched the delicate sprout gently, remembering how his hands had looked working the earth, how his smile had lit up his entire face when she'd laughed at his gardening jokes. The tiny plant seemed to lean into her touch, reaching for the light just as her heart reached for hope. In that moment, surrounded by her father's legacy and the evidence of Elijah's kindness, something shifted inside Danielle. The sprout wasn't just a plant, it was a sign, a reminder that growth was possible even after the harshest seasons. That sometimes love and faith required nothing more than the courage to let them take root. She stayed there a long while, watching the sunlight play through the leaves overhead, feeling the warmth of divine reassurance wrap around her like a familiar blanket. The garden had always been a place of healing, of new beginnings. Maybe, just maybe, it could be again. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Danielle's kitchen counter as she kneaded bread dough with trembling hands. She'd been up since 5 o'clock, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of Elijah. The familiar motions of bread making, a skill passed down from her grandmother, helped calm her nerves. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, working the soft dough with practiced movements. The scent of yeast and flour filled her small kitchen, reminding her of Sunday mornings and second chances. Her mother's words from yesterday still echoed in her mind. "If love comes wrapped in trouble, unwrap it." The dough beneath her fingers seemed to agree, transforming from a shaggy mess into something smooth and full of potential. 3 hours later, Danielle stood in her bathroom, staring at her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to sleepless nights spent wrestling with her conscience. She smoothed her cotton dress, simple but pretty, like the wild flowers that grew behind her father's garden. The fresh loaf of bread sat wrapped in a checkered cloth on her passenger seat as she drove out of town. Tina had helped her track down Elijah's cabin address, though her friend's knowing smile had made Danielle blush furiously. The drive took her through winding country roads, past fields dotted with late summer wildflowers. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with each mile marker. What if he didn't want to see her? What if she'd hurt him too deeply this time? The cabin appeared around a bend, rustic but well-maintained, with morning glory vines climbing the front porch posts. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney despite the warm day. Danielle's heart thundered against her ribs as she parked beside Elijah's familiar truck. She sat there for several long minutes, gathering courage. The bread was still slightly warm in her hands as she finally walked up the gravel path. Each step felt monumental, like crossing an invisible bridge between fear and faith. Before she could lose her nerve, Danielle knocked on the wooden door. The sound seemed to echo through the trees surrounding the cabin. For a moment, only birdsong answered. Then footsteps approached from inside. The door opened, and there stood Elijah, wearing a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His eyes widened slightly, the only sign of his surprise. "Danielle," he said softly, her name carrying a weight of unspoken feelings. "I brought bread," she blurted out, then immediately wanted to sink into the ground. Of all the things she could have said first. But Elijah's face softened into that gentle smile she'd missed so much. "Fresh-baked bread might be the best surprise I've had all week." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" The cabin's interior was warm and inviting, with exposed wooden beams and a stone fireplace where flames danced merrily. Books lined rough-hewn shelves, and a leather armchair sat angled toward the fire, an open Bible on its arm. "I like what you've done with the place," Danielle said, trying to ease the awkwardness that hung between them. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." Elijah gestured toward the couch. "Would you like to sit? I just made coffee." She nodded, settling onto the worn leather couch while he disappeared into the kitchen. The fireplace crackled companionably, filling the silence. Her eyes wandered to the Bible on the armchair, noting the well-worn pages. Elijah returned with 2 steaming mugs and set them on the coffee table. He sat in the armchair, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow made her heart ache more. "I'm sorry," they both said simultaneously, then shared a surprised laugh that broke some of the tension. "Ladies first," Elijah offered with a small smile. Danielle took a deep breath, her fingers playing with the cloth that had wrapped the bread. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I let fear win. When Trevor showed up, I panicked. All those old hurts came rushing back. And She swallowed hard. "I pushed away the best thing that's happened to me in years." Elijah leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You don't need to apologize for being hurt, Danielle. Trust takes time to rebuild once it's been broken. But you've never given me any reason to doubt you. You've been nothing but kind and genuine and—" She met his eyes. "And I miss you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Elijah's expression softened further. "I miss you too," he admitted quietly. Then, after a moment, "Would you like to know why I really left Morgan Industries?" Danielle nodded, picking up a coffee mug more for something to hold on to than from any desire to drink. "I've spent most of my life building things, companies, portfolios, reputation. But after Sarah died, none of it meant anything anymore." He looked into the fire. "I came here looking for a quieter life, one where love isn't a scandal but a sanctuary." He turned back to her. "And then you slapped me in that cafe." They both chuckled at the memory, the sound warming the space between them. "God works in mysterious ways," Danielle said, smiling. "That he does." Elijah stood and moved to the kitchen, returning with plates for the bread. "Shall we see what you've brought?" They shared the warm bread with butter and honey, conversation flowing easier with each passing minute. Danielle told him about the sunflower sprout in the garden, and his eyes lit up with genuine joy. He shared stories about the local veterans he'd been working with, his passion for helping others evident in every word. As afternoon melted into evening, the fire's glow became more pronounced. Elijah reached for his Bible. "Would you like to read together?" he asked. "I've been finding comfort in the Psalms lately." Danielle moved to sit closer to him as he opened to Psalm 23. Their voices blended together in the familiar words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The sacred words washed over them, speaking of restoration and guidance through dark valleys. Danielle felt peace settling into her bones, like coming home after a long journey. The warmth of the fire, the emotional release of the day, and the gentle cadence of Elijah's voice as he continued reading soon had her eyelids growing heavy. She tried to fight it, but exhaustion won out. As consciousness slipped away, she felt herself being gently adjusted on the couch. A soft blanket settled over her, and Elijah's voice, barely above a whisper, reached her through the haze of approaching sleep. "You're safe now," he murmured, the words wrapping around her like a promise. The fire crackled softly, and Danielle drifted off into the most peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks, feeling truly protected for the first time since her father passed away. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Faith Grove's dew-kissed grass as Danielle and Elijah stood at the garden's entrance, surveying the work ahead. Empty flower beds waited patiently for new life, while weathered benches lined crooked pathways that needed attention. "Where should we start?" Danielle asked, tying her hair back with a determined expression. Elijah consulted a notebook filled with his neat handwriting. "The kids from St. Mary's Elementary will be here in an hour. Maybe we could prep the soil for them." They worked side by side, turning rich earth and pulling stubborn weeds. Danielle couldn't help but notice how natural it felt, working alongside him in comfortable silence. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with tiny scars, evidence of a man who wasn't afraid of honest work, despite his wealth. Around 9 o'clock, excited chatter filled the air as Miss Thompson's third-grade class arrived, their small hands clutching garden tools and wearing oversized gloves. "Mr. Elijah!" A little girl named Sarah bounded up to them, her braids bouncing. "Can I plant the purple flowers? They're my favorite." "Of course you can, sweetheart," he answered, kneeling to her level. "Miss Danielle will show you exactly where they'll grow best." Danielle's heart warmed, watching him with the children. He knew each of their names, remembered their favorite colors, and had infinite patience for their endless questions. Together, they guided tiny hands in planting marigolds, petunias, and Sarah's beloved purple verbena. "My daddy says you're rich," one little boy blurted out while patting soil around a seedling. "How come you're playing in the dirt with us?" Elijah smiled gently. "Because some things are worth more than money, Tommy, like watching flowers grow and making new friends." The morning passed in a blur of laughter and learning. When the children left, their shoes muddy and faces beaming, the garden had already begun its transformation. Fresh flowers dotted the beds like colorful promises of better days ahead. During lunch break, Tina appeared with sandwiches from the cafe, her critical eye taking in the scene. "Well, well," she said, handing out the food. "Look at you two, regular garden angels." She settled onto a newly cleaned bench. "You know what? Maybe this town needs a new story to tell. Something besides gossip and old hurts." Danielle caught Elijah's eye, sharing a quiet smile. "Maybe it does," she agreed. The afternoon brought a group of veterans from the center, their weathered faces brightening at the sight of the garden's progress. Elijah had organized a free lunch program, setting up picnic tables under the shade trees. "Reminds me of my mama's garden," one elderly veteran named Frank said, his eyes misty. "She always said a garden feeds more than just the body. It feeds the soul." As they worked together, setting up the lunch area, Danielle watched Elijah interact with the veterans. He listened to their stories with genuine interest, offering not just food but dignity and respect. This wasn't charity, it was community. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent with children learning about plants and nature. Afternoons welcomed veterans and elderly neighbors for lunch and conversation. Slowly, the garden transformed, not just physically, but in its purpose. They repainted benches in cheerful colors chosen by the neighborhood kids. Elijah installed solar-powered garden lights that would twinkle like earthbound stars at night. Danielle started a small vegetable patch, teaching children about growing their own food. One evening, as they finished installing the last of the lights, Danielle found herself remembering her father. "He would have loved this," she said softly, watching the first lights flicker on. "He always said gardens were God's way of teaching us about new beginnings." Elijah touched her shoulder gently. He was right. Every seed planted is an act of faith. The town's attitude shifted gradually but noticeably. Where once there had been whispers and sideways glances, now there were waves and warm greetings. People stopped by the garden to help, or simply to sit and enjoy the peace they found there. Even the local paper ran a positive story. Faith Grove Garden, a community comes together. The article featured photos of children planting flowers and veterans sharing meals, with Danielle and Elijah working quietly in the background. As twilight settled over the garden one evening, they sat on the newly painted bench that had become their favorite spot. The garden lights twinkled overhead like stars brought down to earth, casting soft shadows through the growing plants. "Sometimes I wonder," Elijah said, his voice thoughtful, "if this is what I was looking for all along. Not hiding from my past, but building something new." Danielle watched his profile in the gentle light. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. "When Sarah died, I thought I was running away from everything. But maybe God was leading me here instead, to this town, to this garden." He paused, taking a deep breath. "To you." The evening air seemed to hold its breath. Danielle's heart beat faster as Elijah took her hand in his. "I need to tell you something, Danielle," he said softly. "I'm falling in love with you, not because of any grand gesture or dramatic moment, but because of mornings spent planting hope with children and afternoons sharing bread with strangers who become family. Because you see the world with such grace, even after it's hurt you. Because your strength isn't in never falling, but in always getting back up." Tears welled in Danielle's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of recognition, of finding something precious that had been waiting all along. She squeezed his hand and smiled through her tears. "Then fall," she whispered, her voice full of newfound courage, "with faith." The garden lights twinkled above them, witnesses to a moment when two hearts, once broken, chose to believe in healing. Around them, the garden they'd restored together stood as testament to the power of new beginnings and second chances. In the gentle evening breeze, the flowers they'd planted with the children nodded their colorful heads, as if in blessing. The benches they'd painted together gleamed with fresh purpose. And in that sacred space, surrounded by the evidence of what love and faith could build, Danielle and Elijah sat hand in hand, their hearts as full as the garden around them. The crisp November air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke as Faith Grove Garden prepared for its first Thanksgiving festival. The garden, once threatened with foreclosure, now stood as a testament to what faith and community could achieve together. Danielle worked in the makeshift outdoor kitchen they'd set up, her hands moving with practiced grace as she prepared enough food to feed the whole town. Steam rose from enormous pots of vegetables harvested from the garden's own beds. The scent of roasting turkey and freshly baked bread wafted through the air. "Mama, taste this dressing and tell me if it needs more sage," Danielle called out to Violet, who sat nearby stringing twinkling lights between mason jars. Violet, looking stronger than she had in months, sampled the cornbread dressing and smiled. "Perfect, baby, just like your grandmother used to make." All around them, the garden hummed with activity. Children darted between tables, hanging paper chains they'd made in bright autumn colors. Veterans from the center carefully arranged chairs and tables, their faces bright with purpose. Ladies from the church arranged centerpieces with late-blooming flowers and painted pumpkins. Who would have thought? Tina mused as she helped Danielle arrange desserts on a long table. That one mistaken slap could lead to all this? Danielle laughed, remembering that fateful day in the cafe. God sure does work in mysterious ways. The festival was set to begin at 5 o'clock in the evening, but people started arriving early, carrying additional dishes and eager to help. The same folks who had once whispered behind their hands now called out warm greetings to Danielle. Mrs. Peterson, who'd once been one of the loudest gossips, approached with a sweet potato pie. "This garden," she said, tears in her eyes. "It's brought something back to this town we didn't even know we'd lost." As the sun began its slow descent, the garden transformed into something magical. Hundreds of twinkling lights sparkled overhead, creating a canopy of stars. The autumn air filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation as people gathered around tables laden with food. Frank, the veteran who'd reminded Danielle of her mother's garden months ago, now sat at a table surrounded by young children, telling them stories about his own childhood gardens. Other veterans, once isolated, found themselves welcomed into conversations and pulled into impromptu games of catch with the neighborhood kids. Violet, seated in a place of honor near the center of the garden, beamed with pride as person after person stopped to thank her daughter for her work in the community. Her health had improved remarkably since those first therapy sessions with Elijah, and tonight she fairly glowed with happiness. "The Lord does provide," she kept saying, patting the hands of those who came to greet her. "He provides in ways we never expect." As twilight deepened into evening, the crowd grew quiet as Elijah stepped onto the small stage they'd set up near the garden's entrance. The lights strung overhead cast a warm glow on his face as he surveyed the gathered community. "A few months ago," began, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air, "I came to this town looking for escape. I thought I needed solitude to heal." He paused, his eyes finding Danielle where she stood near the garden gate. What I found instead was a lesson in grace. The crowd listened intently as Elijah continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "I watched this community transform from one quick to judge to one eager to help. I saw children learn about growth and hope in this garden. I witnessed veterans find purpose and belonging here." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the podium. "But most importantly, I learned what grace looks like in human form through one remarkable woman." His eyes locked with Danielle's across the crowd. "Danielle Brooks showed me that true strength isn't in never falling, but in how we rise. She taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the most powerful force we have." Tears gathered in Danielle's eyes as she listened, remembering their journey from that first mistaken slap to this moment. Around her, she could see others in the crowd dabbing at their eyes as well. "When I first came here, I was a man running from his past," Elijah continued. "But Danielle, and this community, taught me how to walk toward a future instead. This garden isn't just about growing plants, it's about growing hope, growing community, and growing faith." The crowd burst into applause, many rising to their feet. Danielle felt hands patting her back, heard voices calling out blessings and thanks. The same community that had once delighted in her embarrassment now celebrated her triumph. Mrs. Peterson wrapped her in a tight hug. "Forgive us for ever doubting you, dear," she whispered. Frank raised his glass in a toast. "To the garden that grew more than just flowers." Children ran up to hug her legs, asking when they could plant more sunflowers. Veterans nodded respectfully in her direction, their eyes bright with gratitude for the sanctuary she'd helped create. Through it all, Danielle stood near the garden gate, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The twinkling lights overhead seemed to dance with joy, and the autumn breeze carried the scent of possibility. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of community and the evidence of God's faithfulness, she understood what her father had always said about gardens being sacred spaces. This was more than just a festival celebrating a restored garden. It was a celebration of restored faith, restored community, and restored hearts. As she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, now friends, Danielle saw reflected in their eyes the same hope that had taken root in her own heart. The garden that had once been threatened with destruction now pulsed with life and purpose, much like her own journey from that day in the cafe to this moment. And as the evening continued, filled with laughter, music, and the breaking of bread together, Danielle knew that this was just the beginning of something even more beautiful. As the festival celebrations continued into the evening, Elijah gently touched Danielle's elbow. "Would you walk with me for a moment?" he asked softly, his eyes warm in the glow of the string lights overhead. Danielle nodded, her heart skipping at his tender expression. He led her away from the main crowd, their footsteps crunching quietly on the gravel path. The sounds of laughter and music from the festival grew fainter as they walked deeper into the garden. The November air held a gentle chill, but Danielle barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on Elijah's hand, warm and steady as it held hers. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a special corner of the garden, the spot where that first sunflower had sprouted months ago, a tiny miracle that had given her hope when she needed it most. Fireflies danced around them like floating stars, their gentle light creating a magical atmosphere in the growing darkness. The tiny insects blinked their silent Morse code of light, turning the garden into an enchanted space. "Do you remember this spot?" Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Danielle replied, smiling at the memory. "This is where that first sunflower seed you gave me sprouted, right when I thought everything was falling apart." Elijah squeezed her hand gently. "That little seed taught me something important," he said. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unexpected places." He reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out a single, perfect sunflower. Danielle's breath caught in her throat as Elijah slowly knelt before her, holding up the flower instead of a traditional ring. The fireflies seemed to gather around them, as if nature itself was blessing this moment. "Danielle Brooks," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you showed me that love, like faith, grows where you least expect it." His eyes shone with unshed tears as he continued. "That day you slapped me in the cafe, I thought I'd found rock bottom. Instead, I found the beginning of everything I never knew I needed." Danielle's hands flew to her face as tears began streaming down her cheeks. Her heart thundered in her chest as Elijah spoke words she'd never dared to dream she'd hear again. "You taught me that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about choosing each other every day, through the hard times and the beautiful ones. It's about planting seeds of hope and watching them grow together." He paused, drawing a shaky breath. "Will you marry me, Danielle? Will you help me grow our garden of faith together?" Through her tears, Danielle could barely see, but her heart had never been clearer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" Her laughter mixed with her sobs as Elijah stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off her feet as they embraced. The sound of cheering erupted from the festival area. Their private moment hadn't been quite as private as they'd thought. Their friends and neighbors had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. Violet sat in her wheelchair at the front of the group, clapping joyfully, tears streaming down her own face. As Elijah set her down, Danielle looked up into his eyes and saw everything she'd been searching for: acceptance, understanding, and pure, unconditional love. For the first time in years, she felt completely seen and truly loved, not for who others wanted her to be, but for exactly who she was. The fireflies continued their dance around them as Elijah carefully tucked the sunflower behind her ear. In that moment, surrounded by the garden they'd restored together, and the community that had become family, Danielle felt the final pieces of her heart heal. The garden that had started as her father's dream had become something even more beautiful, a testament to second chances, to growing faith, and to love that blooms in the most unexpected places. The morning after the proposal dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight spilling across Faith Grove like honey. Dewdrops sparkled on flower petals and grass blades, making the garden shimmer as if dusted with diamonds. Danielle woke early, her heart still floating from the previous evening's joy. She slipped on her father's old gardening sweater and stepped outside, breathing in the sweet morning air. There in the growing light stood Elijah, already at work with the watering can. His tall frame moved methodically between the plant beds, treating each flower with gentle attention. He looked up as she approached, his smile warming her more than the morning sun. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, setting down the watering can. "Morning," she replied, walking over to press a kiss to his cheek. The metal of his watering can caught the light, sending sparkles dancing across their faces. They settled onto the wooden bench they'd restored together, sharing a thermos of coffee between them. Steam curled up into the cool morning air as they sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the garden wake up. The crunch of gravel announced Violet's arrival. She made her way down the path, leaning on her cane, but moving with more strength than she'd had in months. The therapy sessions had worked wonders, and though she still needed support, her steps were steadier now. "Well, if it isn't the two lovebirds," Violet called out, her eyes twinkling with motherly pride. "Room for one more on that bench?" They shifted to make space, and Elijah helped Violet settle between them. She patted both their hands, her weathered fingers gentle against their skin. "The Lord surely does work in mysterious ways," she mused, looking around at the flourishing garden. The peaceful morning silence was soon broken by the happy shouts of children. Several neighborhood kids, already knowing the garden's morning routine, came, running through the gate. Their laughter echoed off the fence posts as they played hide-and-seek among the tall sunflowers and zinnias. "Mr. Elijah! Miss Danielle!" Little Sarah called out, her pigtails bouncing as she ran past. "The butterfly garden got new visitors!" Indeed, several monarch butterflies had found their way to the newly planted milkweed, their orange wings flashing like stained glass in the morning light. The children gathered around, watching in wonder as the delicate creatures danced from flower to flower. Danielle caught Elijah's eye across the garden. In that shared look, she saw everything they'd built together reflected back at her, not just the restored flower beds and fresh painted benches, but the healing of their own hearts. The scar on his hand that she'd first noticed that day in the café now seemed less a mark of pain and more a testament to survival. Her own emotional scars, though still present, had softened into wisdom. Church bells began to ring in the distance, their clear tones floating across the morning air. The sound reminded Danielle of Sunday services, of prayers answered in unexpected ways, of faith that grew stronger through trials. Elijah moved to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Thank God for Mondays," he whispered, his voice filled with gentle humor and deep gratitude. Danielle laughed softly, understanding exactly what he meant. "The day I slapped you was the day God stopped me from running," she replied, leaning into his embrace. It was true. That moment of mistaken identity, of pain and shame, had become the cornerstone of their love story. Around them, Faith Grove continued its morning awakening. Birds called from the trees, children laughed among the flowers, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, blessing everything it touched with golden light. The garden that had once been threatened with foreclosure now stood as a testament to second chances and the power of love to heal and restore. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.